Hi. In Nanoc 19, I talked about DNS security extensions. In Nanoc 22, I talked about progress with DNS security extensions. And at 44, we finally have something done. Took a while. At least, well, we weren't the first, but we got something done. .us has been signed since December of last year. So it's been about 2 or 3 months we've been running. We signed it with NSEC records for those who care about NSEC or NSEC 3. We don't care about people trying to grab all the records. You can get through FTP. We don't have any DS records right now. It's just the NSEC records in the bare zone. We haven't changed our keys yet. We haven't done any other changes yet. The name servers haven't been changed. So what does signing US mean? It means that when you ask us questions right now and we refer you to somebody else, for the most part, you really won't see a difference. Most people haven't been able to see a difference in that way. DNSSEC is built that you only get the records if you ask for them, and actually a lot of people have been asking for them anyway. They don't know that their software is defaulting to grab the records. Not all the DNS software does, but quite a bit of it does. Where something has been noticed is in negative answers, because now when you ask us for a name that doesn't exist in the DNS, and we say it's not there, we give you back a lot more information. And we got a report not long after we went live with our signing, and someone said that they were getting a lot of UDP fragments because of this, because the size of the answer is that much bigger. I just want to let people be aware of this, that this is going to happen or may happen. We've heard this report pretty quickly, but no one else has reported since then. So I'm not sure if others just don't notice it or it's not that big a problem, but it's one that was anticipated with the rollout. And I wanted to plug a DNS OARC test as part of this. There's a test on that URL up on top of that slide, which lets you see how big a response your DNS servers can use. If you're running a recursive server as part of your service, try this to see if you can get a full-sized answer through about 4K. If it's anything less than that, look at any kind of firewalls you have, look at any other network equipment you have that might be trimming the size of UDP of DNS traffic. A lot of older software believes DNS can only be 512 bytes long. So what's ahead for US? Pretty soon we're going to have an early adoption program. We're going to open up to a few invited guests to help us start running this thing and see what it does. It's not so much a test for our internal systems as it is to see what the effect is on the network. Other registries have been signed. We just want to make sure that we know what's going on. And so when something goes on, we know who to contact, who's going to see it, and so on. We're looking forward to the production root zone being signed in this summer, and we're counting on that as part of our key management strategy. Now, the zone key for US, the US signatures out there don't do any good without the key, and the key is available in the DNS, but it doesn't make much sense to take the key out of DNS and use it to secure the DNS. What we're doing for the interim now, and we'll do into the future, is we're going to put our keys up on the web and the PGP signature, and of course, by the time that I've written the slides up, the URL on the bottom has changed. So I'll have to get a new URL out there. I just got it in my mail about 5 minutes ago that they've moved it. And I'm asking to put a link there to the new key set. So we'll have the keys out there, PGP. Also, I'm hoping that we have a PGP key for our registry support. I'd like to get people to sign that so we can use that for some kind of level of trust. I'm going to be the PGP signing, I think it's after this session. John Kristoff, I think, is next. Yeah, something to do with that. One reason why I want to speak to the operator community about DNSSEC coming up here is I want you to realize that DNSSEC has a lot of hooks into it. A lot of things can happen, things can go wrong, and we have the player of the person who's producing the zone. We have what we call the registrant in my industry, the person who owns the domain name. We have the registries involved. We have the ISPs involved. If something goes wrong in any one of those places, customers of ISPs might end up calling the help desk there. It's not the ISP's fault if DNSSEC has a problem, not necessarily something they can control. But they need to be aware that they may be getting calls because of this and be aware of what's happening with DNSSEC, ask questions, and be up on top of when different parts of the DNS system are being signed and brought online. Nobody wants anyone to get their help desk flooded with calls, but we don't want it to happen, but it might happen if we're not careful. So in summary, .us has had a change recently. We added NSEC records. Most people probably haven't even seen it. Negative answers have gotten bigger. Again, we know that's bigger. We've only got one problem concern report. We have more changes coming. We're going to have larger responses when we start signing the chain of DNSSEC down to registrants. That's going to come in the next couple of months. Probably not full volume for a couple of months yet. And also, we're going to be moving name servers around to help us be even better or more able to support the DNSSEC traffic we see coming. So with that, questions, or turn it over to the next?
Oh, if anybody has any questions.
Contact me later if you want. Or
we have time for questions. So.
Oh.
But there are no questions. Okay, next on is Don Kristoff from Team Cymru.
I think it might actually be kind of cool to sign the .us zone, but I don't know that I want that responsibility. Control L, okay. So my name's John Kristoff. I work for Team Cymru, and just by show of hands, I'm curious how many of you have actually used or use FlowSpec? Anybody? Oh, okay, actually a few more than I thought, so maybe about a half dozen or dozen of people. So this is what I want to talk to you about is something I've tried to do a couple of times before, and I'm going to try to make a concerted effort, prove that I'm standing up here in front of you, kind of making a push for this, to do a community-based FlowSpec implementation. If you don't know what FlowSpec is, here's kind of the brief slide that describes it. The RFC is fairly easy to read. You can go check it out. It's if you understand BGP, NLRIs, and that sort of thing, it's not too difficult to make sense of that. But essentially, it's, just think of filters being distributed via BGP. That's primarily what it's used for. It is based off of a flow, though, so you can't do very complex filters. You do a filter based on the kinds of things you find in a NetFlow record, for example. So things like addresses and ports and things like that. And then you can do certain things based on that flow specification. So you could either accept packets based on it, or you could discard or rate limit or sample, NetFlow sample, or redirect it to a VRF or something else. And just anytime FlowSpec comes up, I sort of complain about it a little bit because I think it's the wrong approach to doing distributed filters, doing this over BGP, but, you know, when given lemons, we make lemonade. So, you know, we sort of take what we got. So doing inter-AS FlowSpec, many of you who probably do FlowSpec probably don't do this or don't do it to a great degree. So what I'm proposing is that you do it on an inter-AS basis, something that you're probably not doing. But you can think of this as a multi-hop remote-triggered black hole on steroids. So rather than just dropping packets based on a destination address, you could drop it based on some other things, basically things that you would find in the NetFlow record. So you can think of some of the things that we might be interested as Team Cymru for why we want to do this. Many of you here with our Bogon route server or have heard of this at least. One of the common problems for people doing Bogon filtering is that one, it's difficult in many cases to actually prevent source Bogon addresses, or it's difficult to actually prevent Bogons if someone announces more specific. So you can actually do a more complete Bogon filtering solution using a FlowSpec because it's a real firewall filter that you're actually implementing. And you can do other things too, real-time blacklist or perhaps whatever you could dream up. It does introduce something into your peering relationship perhaps. So now your abuse handler has to get involved in a peering relationship maybe. And so I've been to a few peering events, and so I think a peering coordinator already exists. I didn't have to actually make that up, but I thought that was a nice pun. So what would a community FlowSpec route implementation look like? Well, for us, initially the thing that makes sense is doing a Bogon feed over that. And I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to actually do a destination base because we can already do that. That's real simple. But using it as a source base, that means using it in place of where you might have tried to use a URPF check, or maybe you can't use that because of your infrastructure, so using it for that reason. And then maybe providing an a la carte feed, maybe based on some communities, so things like troublesome multicast groups, which are, you know, all the swamp stuff that happens in multicasts is very difficult to manage manually, so maybe putting that into a FlowSpec feed, or maybe doing blacklists of botnet controllers or any of that sort of thing. And perhaps maybe a community vetted thing. And this is kind of where this has come up a couple of times on the list. People said, wouldn't it be cool if I could inject basically a filter into someone else's router? And that sort of sounds cool for you, but I don't know that it sounds cool for everybody else. But the way we wanted to do this, there's a couple of things that we'd have to apply to sort of protect the peers' routers from basically being getting all kinds of weird instantiated state or essentially black holing all sorts of valid address space. AS path prepending probably doesn't do a whole lot, but we would probably do that. Of course, we'd probably tag it no export and maybe even further restrict it within an AS. Here's what it looks like. If you've never done FlowSpec, you're really only going to be able to have this on your Juniper routers today. I've heard that Alcatel-Lucent has an implementation. I've not seen it. If you have Arbor gear, you can do some FlowSpec stuff. I've not actually used that. I'm familiar with Juniper. I've heard Cisco has some interest in implementing it, but I have not seen it implemented there. So we're pretty much talking about Juniper, and this is what it looks like. It's not terribly difficult. Under your routing options, this is the sort of thing you would have. And I just show you a very simple example of a Bogon FlowSpec here. And here's what the receiver side would look like. You'd set up another INET group just on the flow routes, and basically you just want to get FlowSpec routes from somebody, the NLRI. And in this case, if you want to get, let's say, FlowSpec routes for this prototype project that we're doing, you'd have to specify no validate because we're not always going to be the originator of these prefixes. So this has come up on the list a couple of times, as I said. This might be real nice if people can instantiate filters in other people's routers. That's certainly good for them, but maybe not so much for people whose routers are getting that state applied. I don't know about you, but I don't think I'd want 5,000 filters that someone else actually defined, and I have no idea why or what they're doing. So I'm not sure that this will actually work. I think some people would like this, but that's not the focus. If some people really wanted that, we could try it, I suppose. And so I just list a few bullet points. You could read this later on how might that actually work. So if you want to give it a try, I've got some prototype stuff set up on a couple of Junipers that I've got in the lab. And if you want to just shoot me an email, we'll give it a test roll, and we can set up in a manner that just says accept the routes. You don't actually have to die. You can just look at the counters and see what it's actually doing before you want to go a little further and try to actually drop some packets or rate limit or whatever we may end up doing with that. That's it. Any questions? Maybe one person.
Do you have any questions? Yes.
One question. As the co-author of the FlowSpec, I'm glad to hear such a presentation. I missed in the slides, what is your action on the filters you're sending? Because FlowSpec allows you to drop, rate limit, redirect. What exactly you are discard proposal?
Yeah, and this is just an example here.
Okay, so you're basically discarding the...
And so the idea was to come up with sort of a menu of options that you could do. You could rate limit it or filter, or just accept it if you want to try it out and look at counters, right? So, yeah. All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, next we have Aaron Hughes from 6Connect.
Hello. Ooh. Yeah, that'll wake you up. Okay, this presentation is on best current practices, which is not something we discuss too often in NANOG or ARIN, and kind of a gap between the two that's a funny thing to talk about. So what's a BCP? Today, it's go to your qualified favorite search engine and search for how to implement things. It's hopping on #IX and talking to your buddies. Maybe you know a subject matter expert that knows better than you. And if you've got a whole heck of a lot of patience, you can search through presentations on historical nanogs and hope that the presentation that you're looking at is still current. So what do we want to do about this? Well, one option is nothing, which is what we've been doing for a long time. Another option is actually to do something about it, and that would be to create a repository of living BCPs. So the idea being to ask subject matter experts to submit papers on topics, to share them with the community, and to keep them alive, current, accurate, and searchable. Why do we do this? Well, I and others in the community believe something like this needs to be done. Hopefully this means that things start to get better. As an example, better filters or subnetting or security, cleaner registry information. Perhaps it's more secure. Perhaps we can actually get people to implement things like anti-spoof filters. And hopefully we get a better internet operator community out of it. So as an example, as a BCP, I could write a document on the best current practice for subnetting an IPv6/32 as an ISP. I would submit the BCP to the site, and the community could either accept or reject or maybe vote up or down. People could read it, and if they know something better, they could update that document and resubmit it so it stays current and more accurate. Document in theory gets better over time, and then someone who wouldn't otherwise know how to do whatever's been written then builds a better network or has a better operational practice. So where does it live? And this is always the sticky point in this kind of environment. Nanog generally caters to the 20% of the crowd that doesn't generally need PCPs because they do it in a different way than the majority of the companies with networks. Aaron, on the other hand, could do it because their official party line is that if the community wants to do it, and they could host something like BCPs, it's a little bit of scope creep, and it's a fairly large audience to convince to make a change to the way Aaron operates today. IETF's an option. They have a pretty good management system for documents, although their timeline is fairly long, and that makes it a little difficult for BCPs. So the idea here is to generate a third party, some kind of organization, a good neutral choice for where to put BCPs. And no, this is not creating another meeting. This is just creating an organization and a site to host it and operate these practices. So who's involved? Well, people from the community like you, hopefully enough neutral people like somebody from Nanog PC, somebody from Aaron AC, somebody from Aaron Board, a few subject matter experts to actually start writing some documents, and anybody who's interested in donating their time to help get something like this kicked off. And it would be nice to get a group together of larger than the 5 people that started out with to have a BOF, a good discussion, hammer out the details of how this actually operates. So I'm just looking for a show of hands. Is this something that people would be interested in seeing further support on, doing something with? Oh, good. Okay, so people like the idea of BCPs. Show of hands, anybody says, go find another hobby, you're wasting our time. All right, there's one. All right, so next steps. I don't think that I have time to do this Nanog, but the idea would be to host a BOF to finalize the details. I know there's some space left available in the BOFs tomorrow, but I'm not sure what it conflicts with. There are a whole bunch of questions about this. So, do we want to have a pending versus accepted kind of living document distinction, or a draft versus live? Do we want to limit who can post? Are there a minimum number required for the posters? Do we need things like authentication? How does a doc move from draft to live status? All kinds of questions. And that's something that I'd like to have enough people in the room to sit down together to hash it out, so it's not a dictatorship, but it's a good common decision from a nice slice of the community. And between now and then, I'm going to go ahead and kick off an organization, something neutral, and it can be renamed, and I don't care where it lives after we can figure that out in the BOF, and start by publishing one document. As I mentioned in the example, I started writing a BCP for IPv6 subnettings for ISPs. So I'm going to write a document, kick it off, figure out how to manage this process, and put it up on the site. I started a list, and again, I don't really care where it lives, but I put it on my home servers, BCP-discuss at bind.com. It's a standard mailman list. You're more than welcome to join. I'd certainly appreciate the help and any ideas you have on this. And I just want to thank Lee, Jason, Igor, Chris, and Pete for helping me put this together and get this started. Any questions or comments? Yes?
BrandonRoss.com. I will pay you to give me a tool to convince my partners that NAT private addresses on the provider level are a bad idea.
Okay.
So if number 2 and 3 on that priority list of BCPs to publish are why your provider shouldn't NAT all of your customers and its infrastructure and its servers and everything else, I think that would go a huge way to clearing up some of the messes that are out there in some of these smaller providers that I deal with.
So part of the reason this kicked off is I gave a presentation at Aaron on implementing V6 for ISPs, and someone got up to the mic and said, well, that would be a great kickoff for a BCP. And I had several people come up to me afterwards saying, you know, we're really looking for a place where we can find documents like this. And it's a lot of subjects. It's fairly widespread. And I find that generally speaking, the content that's available here at Nanog is not for beginners. And it is very difficult to find documents to say this is what's generally speaking the best model for implementing X, Y, or Z. And that's the whole idea behind this.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've just gone through the same thing very recently where one of my partners challenged me and said, well, if using private addresses on all of my links between my sites and all that is so bad, why don't you show me all the documents on the internet that say that's bad? And you know what? Yeah, there's a nice number of threads on Nanog that say why that's bad, but that's just a bunch of email, and to someone who's, you know, has a C in their title, a bunch of email means nothing to them. They're like, well, show me a nice document published by some standards organization somewhere that says this is a bad idea, because clearly if no one said it's a bad idea, it must be a good idea.
Right.
Well, there's none. Let me tell you, there's none.
Right. And lots of misinformation out there on search engines.
I want to help.
Cheers. Thank you.
Hi, Danny McPherson. I was just going to comment on the IETF side, and I know that BCP publication, the IETF, usually does take quite a while, but it's a lot quicker than a lot of the standards track documents in the IETF. And one of the reasons it takes so long is because of the vetting or the community feedback process for that, which is going to be a huge challenge here, because if there's disagreement, what's the process around that? And sort of the publication means for everything from updates to that to erratum to other things. And so I wouldn't completely discount the IETF model, I guess, is what I'm asking. And if there are things that need to move in the IETF, I'm sure that the operations area or security area or wherever they reside in the IETF would be amenable to that as well. So, you know, it seems like you kind of shut that off, and it's not even an option because of timelines, when I think that there are things that you could probably do within the IETF framework and employ a lot of the IETF publication structure and, you know, in their BCP publication framework and so forth. So anyway, I see it being discarded here. The other side of that, too, is the inter-region function. If you expect APAC or Europe or other regions to be, you know, to employ this and want them to have feedback versus this being specific to the Americas or just North America, and so forth. So anyway, I see it being blown off completely here, and I don't think that's such a good idea, because you're going to end up with a bunch of fragmented, you know, BCPs in different regions, and everybody's going to have different update procedures and so forth. But anyway, that's all.
Okay. Certainly contribute that to the list. If IETF is the right place, that's great. If there's an existing process that works, great. If one needs modification, then we should modify it. But something certainly needs to change. At a minimum, the IETF BCP, I guess I'll call it repository, is not well known to the community in general. So, you know, maybe the answer is we use that piece of an existing process and give it some marketing in these other meetings. I don't know what the answer is. I'm just saying there's certainly a gap that needs to be filled. And I'd love to have that kind of input on the list to help out.
Aaron, this is a great idea. Unlike Danny, I don't think the IETF is a good idea for this, because it's a heavyweight process that really doesn't work that well, notwithstanding what a lot of people might tell you. And you might observe what's really been written in there. The BCPs, especially in the ops area, are, well, you said it.
Yep.
So, but that said, we've talked about doing this in the context of NANOG without any, kind of convergence on anything, just that, we've been aware that it's something that's necessary. And the issues that Danny raised about what gets branded with whatever this thing is and how does that branding occur is a big process deal. And, I don't think it's insurmountable. It just means that a process would have to be built. And in order to be effective and to avoid the issues that you raised, that process would have to be efficient and streamlined, right? Because one of the problems with the IETF is, BCP is a very formal piece of something, right? And it goes through a lot of peer review, levels of process, and this sort of thing, right?
Again, best current practices in an 80-20 model doesn't require as much scrutiny. This is for the rest of the community that's not trying to do something.
Yeah.
Right. So it's to help the majority of the community, not the minority. I don't, 701, 1239, whatever, they don't need BCPs. They can figure their own stuff out, right? The majority of this room doesn't need this, but the rest of the community does.
You reminded me of one thing. There are a lot of people who come to NANOG for their first time, and they do, what I'm saying is don't undersell the need for that at NANOG as well.
And Igor, could you come up one mic? That back one is really echoey.
Funny.
That's probably where I was standing last.
So as one of the people who are part of putting this together, we don't mean to discount the IETF. It very well could be an option. The big concern is that the IETF ops area does not represent the operational community of NANOG. And we want the BCPs to represent the operational community of NANOG. And whether we adopt the publication process of IETF and do it in a different forum or whatnot, these are very much things we'd like to get feedback on and how you think we should do it. But the current structure of IETF, at least those of us who started talking about this, we don't feel is the right way of doing things.
Cardo Certified, I would like to point out that IETF is a global organization. NANOG is a North American organization, and Internet is a global thing. You might want to involve the global community in drafting these BCPs.
Sure.
One piece of feedback for that, we wanted to make sure that these BCPs are the BCPs for North America, because things could be done differently in the RIPE region, things could be done differently in APNIC than in North America, and that's fine. But we want to make sure that this is a North American BCP because, for example, IP addressing of European ISPs may be completely different than IP addressing of North American ISPs.
Right. There's certainly a gap between policy and what we actually do in day-to-day operations, and those things generally, as a global whole, are fairly similar, but there are certainly deltas that we have to deal with regionally. And, again, I don't know of a good place where this is done today in any region or globally. So this is just a start to try and make things better.
So this is Danny one more time. Sorry, I don't not the hog mic, but I understand the brokenness to Dave's point and some of the slowness issues to Igor's and so forth with the IETF. I know we have looked at this before, but I definitely I don't know. I think it'd be good to send something to the NANOG mailing list and announce this if you haven't already. I don't think I've seen it, and have this discussion. I also understand why you're doing this and the regional issues. It's just it's on the global community side, and some of the structure in place in the IETF I think would add some value. But again, I understand some of the brokenness as well. So thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, we talked about this. This is Joel from Slide, Joel Kreska. I love this idea. I love the idea that as many people as want can contribute. I don't want it to be insular. I'd love it to be a wiki. I'd love it to have some of these more collaborative type inputs. And then I feel it really should spread to not just how do you do IP addressing, but how do you do AAA? How do you secure your ACLs? You know, it'll have a lot of overlap with some sysadmin functions, but these things are out there. I just say build it and then ask people to contribute, and don't spend too much time navel gazing and saying, oh, well, what does it need to be structured at, and how do we approve these things? Just encourage
couldn't agree
content.
more. The idea behind the V6 addressing is that it's a well-known current topic that people have interest in. So it's a good place to start to figure out if the process actually works. From there, it's organic, right?
Great.
I would caution you to look at the IETF process and find out what's broken, because otherwise you'll end up building the same thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And please, that kind of input to the list or the BOF would be fantastic. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron.
Cheers.
Okay. Okay, so we're about to have our break now. It's time for coffee. The next session will start at 4:30, and we will split out to 2 tracks. In this room, we will have the route server track, and in Salon G, we will have the NSPsec. Don't forget to fill out your surveys with comments on today's and yesterday's sessions. And if you file it in before 6 p.m., you will be in our draw for a MacBook Pro. And don't forget to go to Beer and Gear tonight and to the social event afterwards. Thank you.